art. It's all around us, especially in the great city of Olympia. Tonight we'll be talking about art, looking at it and appreciating it as well. This is Exploring Art on Termite TV. First off, we'll be watching a tutorial on the methods of shading with Chris Burns, a local artist here in Olympia. Now let's see what Chris has to say.
Okay, so now that we've spent some time looking at artwork, how about we make some artwork ourselves? For this demonstration, I'm just going to use some paper and some basic coloring utensils. But you don't need to use these exact same materials if you want to follow along at home. Let's start out by drawing something simple, like a nice red ball. And I'm going to draw an extra ball on this sheet of paper to serve as a comparison. Because one of these drawings is going to be an example of what not to do when you illustrate with color. Some of you might already know this, but one of the most important things that I learned about art is that whenever you color in shadows, do not shade with black. It might look okay with some colors, but I think we can do better. Now, for the extra ball from earlier, let's try drawing its shadow with blue instead. And now, since part of the shadow is overlapping with the red color on top of the ball, let's color in this shadow with purple. Doesn't this drawing look a lot better than this drawing from before? Of course, you can also try this with other colors like yellow, blue, and green, or even multiple variations of blue like periwinkle, azure, and ultramarine. The most important thing to remember is never shade with black, shade with blue.
Now that we've seen a little of the work created on paper, we can take a look at the student Bryan Shickley's digital methods. Now, what I find compelling about art is that it can be expressed in so many different ways, mediums, anything. Nitty-gritty on paper, making a statement on a wall or a sidewalk, or cleanly illustrated on a computer, which is where I come in. I primarily work with digital medium. The tools that I recommend are products that use Wacom technology, such as a Bamboo or an Intuos. But if you have the money, you'd prefer something like a Surface Pro or a Cintiq. Any other tablets, such as a Samsung Galaxy or any of the iPad series, they are acceptable, but what's really cool about Wacom stuff is it doesn't track the palm of your hand when you're drawing. Now the software I use is Autodesk Sketchbook, much like Photoshop, much simpler. Tonight we'll be using Sketchbook Pro for Windows on my Surface Pro 2, the optimal tools. The interface is very easy for a beginner. Layers, brushes, colors, and a selection of markers. All of these can be found from the top panel to the right. You can select a brush, select a color, and just begin illustrating. I'll start with a fine pencil and demonstrate sketching on the bottom layer. When I draw, I typically have 1 to 2 sketching layers depending on the amount of detail I want to add. Today I'll just be using one. now that I've sketched out the rough design of this little character, I can click here to create a new layer. This layer will be the inking layer. The current version of Sketchbook has this lovely inking quill, which I use for all my illustrations, mostly comic covers. I tend to use thicker lines for things up close, because as you see, it creates a sense of depth. Now that the image is all inked, make absolutely sure you connect every line as intended, because when you start coloring, computers are stupid and it won't be able to tell you if it's colored in between the lines. Once checked, open either the Color Picker tab or the Copic Marker tab. I prefer the Copic. They're based off markers you can find in most art stores. Once you select the color, click the paint bucket and do your thing. Sometimes the paint bucket doesn't fill every last dot in. Quick fix for that, duplicate the layer like I'm doing here. Fills in all the holes. Now finally, shading can be a bit tricky. Now the way I do it is I often select a darker, bluer counterpart of the colors available, paint them in using the ink tool, and then fill the rest in like so. Once shaded entirely, I often use the smudge brushes to blend the colors together. This is similar to paint, but with the digital edge, you can add a lot more fine detail to it. And those are the fundamentals of creating your very own digital art. Now we've seen some how-tos, but what really inspires artists like this? Let's take a look at the groundbreaking work of the great 20th century graffiti artist, Jean-Michel Basquiat.
I think there's a lot of people that are neglected in art. I don't know because if it's who made the paintings or what, but I don't know. I know black people are never really portrayed realistically, and not even portrayed in modern art enough.
In Basquiat's work, the crown is not an unambiguous image. While it may positively speak for the longing of glory and power, it connects that desire to dehumanization, to the general willingness on the part of males globally to commit any unjust act that will lead them to the top. For the white art world to recognize Basquiat, he had to sacrifice those parts of himself they would not be interested in or fascinated by.
This work is called Jawbone of an Ass, and it has Basquiat's familiar mix of words, pictures, and abstract brushwork. His crude images, like this carnivorous bird, may seem naive, but they reveal basic truths and are filled with knowing humor. On the upper left, Basquiat has crossed out the words Rodin's thinker and has painted a contemplative black youth in a ghetto hat.
Basquiat makes it clear that black masculinity is irrevocably linked to white masculinity by virtue of a shared obsession with conquest, both sexual and political. No such spirit of possession guarded Jean-Michel Basquiat in his life. Napier reports that people in trance do not, as performance artists do in the West sometimes, leave wounded bodies in the human world. Basquiat must go down in history as one of the wounded. Yet his art will stand as the testimony that declares with a vengeance, we are more than our pain. That is why I am most moved by the one Basquiat painting that juxtaposes the paradigm of ritual sacrifice with that of ritual recovery and return.
There are no shortage of heads in this exhibition. Here, on quilted bedding material, painted a bright yellow and tied to a wooden frame, is the expressive face of a black man. Basquiat knows black culture, and this unstretched canvas depicts the black middleweight boxing champion Sugar Ray Robinson, complete with a crown like those used in graffiti signature tags.
From our dreamers to those who dreamt before our time, we've examined a little bit about art and a little bit about how to make it. But now it's time to wrap things up. This has been Exploring Art.